Welcome to the studio. I'm Christine Lashley. I want to share with you how I made this oil painting. It was based on several pieces of reference, and I learned a lot while creating it. I recently traveled to Spain, specifically to see more artwork of Joaquin Sorolla, a favorite artist of mine. I wanted to stand where he stood when he painted his paintings. I wanted to visit his home in Madrid, his gardens, and some of his favorite places to visit, such as Seville. When I returned to my studio, I made a master copy of one of his paintings, and what I discovered changed how I think about composition, editing, and even my own voice as an artist. Before we get to the demo, I really want to emphasize how important it is to see original art. The size and scale of the paintings and walking through Sorolla's house really exceeded my expectations. If you can visit a museum or make a trip to see original art and where an artist painted, it's just a fantastic experience. Check out the brush marks up close and also the use of Sorolla's color. It's pretty amazing to see paintings you've always admired in reproduction form and then actually get up close to appreciate the brush marks and the nuances that you can see from the original painting. This painting was so vibrant in person, and I really got up close to look at the flesh tones and light and shadow bars. Absolutely fantastic work. You could see the furniture that he chose to have in his home and then paintings he had made from these pieces. When you see a work of art in person, sometimes what you saw in reproduction form doesn't strike a chord, but the original is really astonishing. With this painting, I couldn't believe some of the graphic shapes he had chosen and some of the texture points, such as with the hat and this woman's glove. Visiting Sorolla's home and gardens was deeply moving. I wanted to experience the light, the space, the atmosphere that shaped his work. I stood in the same location where he painted many of his paintings, but it was later when I visited Seville at the Alcazar Gardens that I was really struck by a specific fountain that he painted over and over. I took photos of the fountain itself, but on location I was struck by the crowds, and it was really active, plus the light was fluctuating back and forth, so it didn't carry the same sense of peace and quiet I had seen in Sorolla's paintings. The contrast stayed with me, even after I got back from my trip. I realized the feeling of his artwork wasn't just observation, it was interpretation. When I returned home, I decided to make a master copy of that painting. I was drawn to the color relationships that he chose and the calm structure of the composition. There seemed to be a flattening effect where, for example, he didn't include the sky and everything seemed very centered, so I wanted to explore that. Here I am getting started with the toning washes and working out the preliminary part of the design with an underpainting. In making the copy, I wanted to understand why he had made those decisions. Master copies allow us to study not just what we see, but how meaning is constructed in a painting. As I worked, I began to see how carefully the composition was organized. I assumed that he had just made a quick capture of the scene because I know that he worked large and he did work on location. But there was a much deeper structure built within the painting. I had to make an adjustment to the line of the base of the archway, and I realized that he had put the highlighted right side archway dead center in the painting, which is considered a no-no as far as constructing a painting. So that seemed like a really daring choice, and I hadn't noticed that at first. Furthermore, as I copied, I started to fuss a little bit with the edges and the tile work. So in fact, I ended up painting and rescraping that a couple of times in order to make the copy of the painting. After I overcame those pitfalls, I realized the peace I felt in the painting was not accidental. It came from really careful editing. Sorolla simplified forms. He controlled value relationships, meaning there was an overall tonal range of barely any strong highlights used. Most of the tonal range of his painting was in the mid-tones. He also removed distractions, such as the pots on the right were extremely simplified. This was surprising to me because when I stood at the same spot in Spain, I just was really attracted to the glitter of the fountain and the reflection of the water. But Sorolla's painting wasn't a transcript of reality. It was a refined statement and also honoring a specific time of day. So much of creating this master copy was worthwhile. And I was really surprised at what happened next. I reached a point where the painting stopped feeling like a copy, and it almost became a conversation. I began to understand what needed to remain and what could change. My own decisions became more clear. At a certain point, I almost felt like Sorolla and I were standing side by side, solving visual problems together. The experience really exceeded my expectations. What started out as a mechanical exercise really became something else, and I was really thrilled with how the painting came out. I do feel like I made it my own with the shards of light and the flickering patterns. Plus, I kind of leaned into the glitter of the fountain instead of including the cat, and the tile ended up being a fun point of adding some detail. Whereas Sorolla had left out a lot of the tile work and he completely didn't have any of the reflections of the water. Here's a direct comparison of Sorolla's work on the left and mine on the right to see the difference in the final pieces. Meanwhile, I have a few more marks to go before the demo is complete, and then I'll show you the final. So we could learn that master copies are not about imitation, they're about understanding intention. They teach us what to include, what to leave out, how structure creates a feeling, and how editing creates clarity. And perhaps most importantly, they help us to recognize our own artistic voice in relation to what came before us. Visiting Sorolla's world was inspiring, but painting alongside his ideas through this master copy was really transformative. If there's a painting that has stayed with you, consider studying it deeply. You may discover not only how it was made, but what you want your own work to say. Here's how the final painting came out after I finished my edits and added different elements to make the scene my own. This was a different way to learn, and it was pretty cool. This will be available at my exhibit that I'm going to be having. I've been working on a large amount of artwork, and I have other videos on creating a solo show in preparation for that you might want to check out, and also on working with grays. And this was a more neutral painting, so if you enjoyed this content, you'll probably enjoy that video as well. Do like and subscribe if you like this content, and thanks for hanging out with me while I shared my process with you. Thanks, everybody.